All right, welcome everyone to the Organizers Forum. Today's topic is winning elections by getting out the disability vote. We are excited to have you all here, and this is being recorded. We'll be able to share it with other folks later as well. So my name is Jessica Lehman. I use she and her. I am a white woman with short brown hair, kind of in a bob. And I have a colorful background with circles behind me. And I'm wearing well, I guess you can't tell it's a dress, but a blue and white sleeveless dress. And I am the executive director of Senior and Disability Action, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I head up the Organizers Forum. And the Organizers Forum, for folks that are new to it, is designed to expand and support community organizing in disability communities. And we work on identifying intersections between disability and ableism and other identities and oppressions. We work to support each other with strategies and ideas and understanding how to engage grassroots folks with important issues. And we have a listserv, Disability Organizing, at googlegroups.com. If you're not a part of it yet, please put your email in the chat and let me know. And we generally have a call on the third Tuesday of each month at this time, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. So mark your calendar for those calls. And we're always open to new topics and ideas. So let me know if you have something that you'd like to cover or you'd like to learn about. We're also on Facebook and Twitter, and I would invite people during the call to go ahead and post or tweet so we can spread the word. On Facebook, it's Organizers Forum, just like it looks. And you can go ahead and like that page, or is it follow, so that you'll get notifications on there. And then on Twitter, we are Disability Organizers Forum. So please be sure to follow us on Twitter as well, so you'll get information about upcoming events. All right. So let's see, what else? I want to say something about collective access, which is an important value for these calls, which is that we all share responsibility to make the call as accessible and inclusive as possible. We also recognize that sometimes there are conflicting access needs. So chat on Zoom is one example. It's good for some and distracting for others. So we ask folks to use it minimally. If you have a resource to share, or if the chat is a good way for you to share a question or a comment, please put it in the chat. We'll try to minimize kind of hellos and things, but you can also chat individually to folks so it doesn't distract others. And if you use a screen reader and you find the chat distracting, you can also let me know. Well, I guess the chat might not be a good way to do that. But I was going to say, we can help you to turn off the chat so you don't get those notifications. My coworker, Edith Pastorena, has also offered to help with tech today. So you can send Edith a message if you need some individual help. The call is captioned. So be sure to go to the bottom of your screen and choose show subtitle if that isn't showing up for you yet. And I'll ask Edith to put that in the chat as well, how to turn on captions so that that's accessible to everyone. And we have two ASL interpreters, Kat and Norma. Thank you for being here. We will have them spotlighted the whole time. And we ask folks to mute until we open for discussion. But there will be a chance for discussion as well. So we want to make sure we hear everyone's voices. All right. Did I miss any kind of housekeeping introduction stuff? Anyone want to remind me of? Okay, I think I got it. So I'm very excited to introduce the topic for today. So some folks here are probably familiar with the incredible nonprofit community organization, Detroit Disability Power. And actually, I'm wondering if we have anyone besides Tova from Detroit Disability Power on the call yet. Not that I see. So Detroit Disability Power started a couple years ago, and it's a grassroots membership-based group that is working on all kinds of issues, really bringing people together to make change in Detroit and beyond. And they saw a need for helping people learn why and how to get out the disability vote in elections. And so they created this incredible guide called The A to Z of Effective Inclusive Campaigns: Win Elections by Getting Out the Disability Vote. So, of course, those of us who work in disability communities know that this isn't a matter of oh, you know, include disabled people because we matter and we want to be included. Yes, of course, that's all true. But it's also, you need disabled voters, that there are a lot of us around the country and we are paying attention and we can help win elections, right? And when we mobilize our own communities, we can have more of an impact on what we want our communities to look like. And we'll talk more about this later too, but I do want to point out that a lot of us are with 501c3 nonprofit organizations who worry about lobbying, but there are no limits on us registering voters, inviting people to go vote, helping people get to the polls, and pushing for ballot initiatives, right? We just can't talk about candidates. So there's a lot we can do. And I should stop talking about this guide because today is for the lead author to present the guide. So we have Tova Perlmutter here, who really put it together and is going to help us understand what is in the guide, how to use it, who we should pass it on to, and answer folks' questions on it. We will also have some time at the end to hear from other folks about exciting resources you may have or what you're doing in your own communities. So Tova Perlmutter uses she and her, and Tova is the Special Projects Consultant at Detroit Disability Power, or DDP. She has over 30 years of experience helping progressive initiatives get resources to advance social change. And in 2020, she managed DDP's Get Out the Vote campaign. And I think this was really groundbreaking work in the country, leading a diverse team of 11 people who reached over 250,000 voters in Southeast Michigan, talking to everyone about disability and how it mattered in elections. Prior to that, she was on the leadership team at a nonprofit media outlet. And then she had worked as executive director at the Sugar Loss Center for Economic and Social Justice in Detroit. And Tova says that her work with DDP has been healing and awakening as she has learned to recognize and draw on her own experience as a disabled person. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Tova to introduce yourself and tell us something about this exciting guide.
Jessica, I'm just so thrilled to be in this group and to be able to talk about our work on this guide. Thank you for giving me and thus DDP the opportunity. I'll start by just giving a brief visual description of myself. I'm a 55-year-old woman. I have mostly still brown hair that is back in a ponytail with a lot of white in it as well. And there's a lovely skylight above me that makes the room bright, but also means there's sort of almost a spotlight on me coming from that. I have sort of funky glasses, and there are curtains behind me that look like a forest grotto. I'm white, I'm 55 years old, and I think, I'm wearing a sort of turquoisey t-shirt. And I guess if I can just sort of give the broad overview of why we created this guide, it's to do with the fact that in 2020, when DDP decided to do its first ever Get Out the Vote campaign. The organization had been around for 2 years at that point. So we actually are just about to celebrate our 4th birthday, which is exciting. But we had never run a Get Out the Vote campaign. As some of you may remember, if you were involved in electoral politics at all in 2020, there was a massive demand for experienced campaign managers. And so we sort of got funding at the last minute and didn't necessarily think that we were going to succeed in competing for people who had been running electoral campaigns and Get Out the Vote campaigns before. But Dessa and I knew each other. She knew that I had run a lot of other sort of kinds of programming. I had participated in Get Out the Vote campaigns. And so we both thought, well, Tova can do this, you know. And I will say that part of the reason that I took on the challenge was that I assumed that there would be resources comparable to the one that we have just created, sort of online, you know, guides that I could go to that would sort of say, okay, here's what you do. And what we found was that a lot of what we would have liked to have had didn't exist. And so we sort of did a lot of invention on the fly in terms of how to work with our team, which was an amazing team, diverse in terms of both race and age, as well as disability status. We had people with a whole range of physical, mental disability issues. I have mental illness and neurodivergence. And so, you know, that I was one of the people in the group that, you know, had accommodations that we needed to make things work. And so we sort of developed our own tools as we went. We were very disappointed to find that the guides and tools and training modules for a lot of the most important campaign tools out there weren't necessarily fully accessible. So for example, EveryAction, which is a source for sending emails, but also connecting what you do with the voter databases, their instructions didn't have videos or captions on their videos. So our deaf staffer was very limited in what he could learn about using this resource. That's just one example, but we came out of the process feeling that not only was there a need for guidance on how to make campaigns accessible to disabled people as both voters and participants in mobilizing voters, but also that there was a surprising scarcity of resources just on how do you run a campaign at all, especially if you are a small grassroots organization that may feel nervous about the issues around 501c3, pardon me, status. So we just spent about a year putting together this project, this guide. It ended up being, I think, more massive than we ever expected, but I think that it really brings together a lot of useful resources, and we're hopeful that it will help people in all kinds of organizations around the country.
Thanks so much, Tova. I just put the guide in the chat. It is very long and comprehensive, so I want to invite people to take a look at it as Tova tells us about it, but don't be too distracted, right? Before we go on, I would like to get a sense of who we have in the room with us today. So we'll start with actually who either works with or, you know, participates with a disability organization. And go ahead, and if you're on video, you can raise your hand physically, or you can use the Zoom raise hand or put yes in the chat. So who is from a disability organization? Okay, I'm seeing a bunch of hands, and a lot of you I know are from disability organizations as well. Okay, so that's a lot of people. Okay, so go ahead and put your hands down. And then if you are with a disability organization that fits what Tova was saying just now about, you know, maybe you'd like to be doing some get out the vote work or some elections related work, but don't really know where to start, or you worry about what you're legally allowed to do, and you could use some guidance. Okay, a lot of the same folks. So that's a really important, it's a small sample size, but that may mean that there are probably a lot of us in disability organizations that maybe want to be doing more and could use some guidance. How about folks that are in that do campaigning or some kind of elections work that is not disability specific? Can you raise your hand or say yes in the chat? Okay, I don't see anybody's hand go up. So we may be oh, there's somebody. All right. And I know a few people are don't have video showing, so we may have a couple more. Okay, and then go ahead and put your hand down. And my last question is, who do we have here who currently does a lot of elections or campaigning work that may or may not be that some is disability specific, that you're kind of working on getting out the vote among disabled people? All right, so we've got a new crowd here. Oh, there's a couple hands going up. Oh, there's a few. All right, so we are a very mixed crowd, and part of what yeah, somebody says trying in the chat. Thanks, Shelby. And you can go ahead and put your hands down. Thank you for that. So part of what I think is so exciting about this guide is that it really does meet a lot of different needs. So today it sounds like we can focus on a lot of the introductory guidance, but know that there's something in there for everyone. So I want to ask Tova to jump in with, what is one part of the guide that you find really fun or exciting? And you're also welcome to share your screen if you want to.
I don't think I'll need to.
Okay.
I will say that I'm such a geek that I'm sort of excited by all these different parts. One part that I find exciting and kind of inspiring is probably not needed for most of the people on this call, which is the first few chapters are really trying to give kind of a context and a philosophical approach to people who have not focused on inclusion and disabled the disability community before. And so that was a lot of fun to work on. But this group, I think, will probably get more out of. We have sections sort of on the basics of campaign planning. How do you do it? What should your timeline be? How do you develop a message? But the part that I actually, in many ways, learned the most from working on and found most exciting and fun was a section that we did on how to manage a team with values of dignity and respect for all team members. And that really applies even not in the campaign context. And what was exciting was that we used a framework that was developed by anti-racist DEI experts in Detroit, focusing mostly on people sort of excluded from a lot of mainstream employment opportunities by either their sort of racial background, their income, people who have been sort of marginalized in a lot of the corporate systems of employment. That was how they developed the framework, but we found that it was extremely adaptable to look at how do you manage with dignity and applying growth and opportunities for everyone, as well as your hiring practices with a view toward disability, as well as other intersectional challenges and oppressions that people face. So that was, I mean, that was really exciting to sort of, we all came into the process. We had a group that was diverse by race and in other ways. We all came into it with a commitment to intersectionality, but it was very exciting to see how we could kind of put that in practice in writing up some recommendations on how to manage a team.
Thank you so much, Tova. related to what you were saying just now, so we know that extensive tactics get used to keep Black and brown people and other people of color from voting and having a voice in general. How does this guide address that?
Great question. So we talk about it a bit in the beginning, and we talk about it again in this context of, sort of hiring and managing a team. But there's also a section of the guide that's specifically about access to voting, sort of looking at, who gets to go to the polls and who gets their vote counted. And so that one has a chapter looking specifically at forms of voter suppression by certainly in terms of racialized communities, but also I think many of us know that at this point, people who have any kind of a background with law enforcement or have been in the carceral system have challenges getting to vote. So we did a chapter sort of looking at the overview of what are all the different ways that people seeking to limit voting have targeted different groups. And then we have sort of a follow-up chapter in that same section looking specifically at what can you and should you demand from your local election officials.
That's great. And I want to acknowledge that unfortunately, we don't have a racially diverse call today, that I'm a white woman and Tova, our presenter, is a white woman. And it's really a priority to continue to work to center voices of disabled people of color. And so good to hear from Tova about the really broad group that worked on this guide, and that we want to hear from more folks today as well. So as I just pulled up the guide myself, I want to jump to a question about how do people get access to the guide? What formats is it in, and is there a cost?
Yeah, great question. So we have a website specifically for the guide. It's called inclusivecampaigns.org. And if you go to it, you can get online access immediately to the guide. We ask for a donation from anyone who's able to do one, and we do have a suggested donation amount, but we also have a way that you can get it if you can't afford even the $20 that we've asked for. And the donations that we're requesting are purely to recoup some of our costs in developing the guide. There's certainly not a profit agenda involved. But yeah, at that website, you can either get immediate access to the online version, and I'll talk a moment about what that looks like or how it operates, or you can also order a hard copy to be shipped to you. I would say if you have any access at all to using information online, that's probably a better way to go for most people. We have made it screen reader accessible. We went to some pains to do so. And I think what's good about that is you can then sort of use search functions to find what you want to. We put it in a fully screen reader accessible platform that almost operates like a manual. And so you can see the table of contents at all times and click on whatever section you might want to go to. It's a pretty user-friendly, I would say, system for a lot of information.
That's great to hear. I also want to invite people, as Tova and I are talking about the guide, if you have a question about it or something that you're particularly interested in hearing about, go ahead and put that in the chat and I will take a look there. And we'll also have a chance for people to share those yourselves in a few minutes. What question should I go to next? So this came up a little bit before, but can you speak to the issue of nonprofit disability organizations or other nonprofits who can't campaign for a candidate, worry about their 501c3 status? How and why can they use this guide?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I personally have actually never been involved with a candidate campaign on anything more than just you know, doing a little bit of door knocking on the weekend as in my own volunteer citizen capacity. So I'm most comfortable with 501c3s working on electoral contexts. And really the way to be compliant with federal law on this is simply to be nonpartisan, not talk about or endorse or condemn any candidates, but talk about issues and talk about the importance of voting to express your values and make the change that you want to. So there are no limits on nonprofits, 501c3s doing education about political issues or urging people to vote. There are limits when it comes to, you can never endorse a candidate, and there are limits if you want to campaign for a specific named piece of legislation. And that's where even that can be done, but there are some limits on how much of your resources you can spend on it. And what we've actually done, rather than reinvent the wheel, there's a fantastic resource that I recommend to all of you. The Alliance for Justice is a wonderful nonprofit, and they have a website called Boulder Advocacy. And that is the best resource, bar none, on telling 501c3 nonprofits how you can be compliant with the law while still advancing the causes and mission that matter most to you. So we actually urged people to determine, you know, what kind of organization they are and understand that, and then use this, you know, as I say, really top-notch resource in terms of understanding the legal, what's legally possible.
Thank you. I love Alliance for Justice. They also do excellent trainings in addition to their website, which I shared in the chat and will email out as well. I would recommend, I'm sure their trainings are on Zoom. I did a couple in person years ago, but I would highly recommend that for anyone.
Yeah, and my understanding is they even will give individual coaching if you ask for it. I don't know the details on that, but they're awesome.
Nice. Okay, so we talked a little bit about disability organizations. Obviously, we'll continue to talk about that. But for campaign managers who are new to disability, where do they start?
Yeah, that was actually, you know, in some ways, the most exciting part of this, because we really did do this opening section. It's called Fundamentals of Disabilities and Campaigning. And it really introduces people who have not been in the world of disability justice to some of the core principles that I think a lot of us have been working with for some time. And so we talk about, well, we talk about a number of things, including something I don't know if everyone on this call or meeting is aware of, but there's something of a tradition within the electoral campaigning world of what I would call a toxic work environment. There is this sense that people take pride in working themselves to the bone. People show off about how they, you know, haven't eaten in weeks and they are subsisting on coffee and, you know, what is sleep kind of thing. And so part of what we are doing is pushing back against that for both disabled participants in campaigns, but also with the understanding that even people who do not identify as disabled need and can perform better if they have a healthy work environment and conditions. So we talk a bit about that. We define what accommodations are and explain them both in the legal context, but also more generally in terms of how can you make things accessible that you're working on, your events, your resources. We have a whole section of disability resources and how to, which is technical guidance, and it's divided into sections based on the type of disability and accommodation needed. So, and I would actually say this is valuable for people even outside of electoral campaigns, just if you want to make your organization more inclusive, because we really break it down. Here are the tools and practices that are appropriate to include people with vision or reading related disabilities. Here are the ones for people with mobility issues. Here are the ones valuable for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. or have other speech or audio, auditory disabilities. So we really try to sort of address the various ways that our amazing, communities are diverse in terms of ability, and in ways that people don't necessarily identify, they don't necessarily diagnose. But the more we can offer comfortable and receptive environments for our campaign activities, the more we get everyone involved and motivated and mobilized. So, I would say for those folks, this part one on fundamentals of disabilities and campaigning, the part that I mentioned before about managing campaign teams with values of dignity and respect is really vital. And then this section at the end, disability resources, the how-to, the nuts and bolts. We also have some campaign material, sample campaign materials, and a glossary. So I think there's sort of a really comprehensive approach.
You have everything in here. And yeah, I really appreciate that. I was thinking about the pace of elections and that it's hard on anyone, the kind of nonstop culture leading up to an election, but can be especially hard for people with some disabilities. And that's a place, I think, where disability justice is so important, right? For people to say, here's the vision we have, here's the kind of world that we need to live in, and this is actually good for everybody. So yeah, thank you for that. There's so much I want to ask you about. So for everyone on the call, I want to jump to, I think it's part 6 of the guide, is how do we reach disabled voters? I think this is something that is a constant challenge in disability communities. And I see social media being used a lot. Thank you to the folks that created hashtag #CryptTheVote. And there's certainly other hashtags and other folks that are doing great work around it on social media. But we also know there's lots of disabled people that aren't on social media. So what do we do?
Well, it's interesting because one part of the guide that I haven't even mentioned yet is a section on targeting your audience for your messaging. And we give mostly sort of technical advice on how to do that using one of the voter databases there, these sort of enhanced voter files, as they're called. But what's interesting about them is that, to my knowledge, none of them actually has the ability to search by disability status. That's not a filter or a criterion or a factor that is tracked. There's some good and some less good reasons for that. But what we have done, we at DDP, in seeking to reach disability community, and we use that phrase to say that we believe people concerned about disability issues are both disabled people and their caregivers, families, and friends. So we use the term a bit more broadly. But what we have basically said is that we don't have the ability at this moment, and we're not sure it's necessarily ideal to do a sort of, a query by disability status. And that's because so many people who benefit from accommodations for disabled people don't necessarily identify as disabled or have not been labeled as such by the system that tracks these kinds of things. And so what we have done, and we felt pretty good about it, is that we used low income and lower, what they call propensity to vote, so lesser record of having showed up at the polls. We used those as a sort of proxy to reach the people that we most felt we needed to reach. But we also felt and feel pretty strongly that the messaging about why disability matters at the polls is messaging that should go to everybody, whether they identify and understand themselves to be disabled or not. But we know that there is such a very large overlap between people with diagnosed or undiagnosed disabilities and people with low income that we felt fairly comfortable using that to define our audience.
Thank you. And I think that also really gets at the intersectionality of disability and race and class that we know there are a lot of groups reaching out to working class folks, right? Who are, people who are low income, people who are less likely to vote, like you said, who aren't necessarily thinking about, oh, a lot of these people are also disabled, and we should be talking about it kind of goes both ways, right? Talking about disability can be a way to turn out poor folks, to turn out Black and brown folks, and vice versa.
Yeah, I should say that there are ways that, because we operate in Detroit, it's, there's so much kind of, overlap and congruence among these groups that we haven't had to think a lot about it, because I mean, Detroit itself is, 80% Black and another 6 to 8% Latino. The surrounding areas and Detroit itself have substantial Asian American communities. So, by focusing geographically, in some ways, we didn't sort of worry as much about, and quite frankly, the electorate, the potential voters in our area are so heavily progressive ideologically that, again, there are decisions that people would have to make about how to target their messaging and their resources in other parts of the country that we in Detroit, we know that if we're reaching a lot of folks who don't have much money, we are reaching a lot of Black and brown folks, we are reaching a lot of disabled folks. And frankly, most of those people have more than one of those identities. We hear that over and over again when we talk to them.
So Tova, will you break it down a little bit for those of us that are new to this? So you talked about using a voter database. Let's say we're talking about an organization that is pretty small, that doesn't have a lot of resources to put into the upcoming election, but wants to do some outreach. What does it look like to get a database, to make the calls? What are you saying on those calls?
So that's a great question. So, what the first thing I would actually say to everyone, and again, it may seem that my sort of whole whole gig here is to promote other organizations, but I do believe that there are some wonderful resources out there, and we should promote them. There's a group called State Voices, and I don't know how many of you have heard of them, but they exist specifically to help grassroots 501c3 groups influence social change and affect change. And they have actual staff in something more than half of the states, but they also provide supports for people in states that they don't have an existing office. And among the things that they do, if your values match with theirs in terms of progressive voter turnout, they will provide free access to the voter databases and training on how to use them. And sometimes they'll even pull the data for you so that you don't have to sort of learn the database. So if you're a small group, the very first thing that I would tell anybody to do is see what State Voices can do for you, because they may well be able to give you a list of, folks to text, folks to call, as well as the technological tools to do the texting and phoning. And if possible, door to door is sort of the gold standard for best outcomes, best impact in changing people's behavior. But of course, with COVID, there have been limits on how much people have wanted to do that.
And what are these conversations like, whether they're on the phone or on the doors?
Sorry, you did say that, and I
There's a lot.
There's a lot. Well, one of the things that we've found is that you don't have much time or much of people's attention, right? People have a lot of things on their minds. People have a lot going on in their lives. And even the ones who don't sort of immediately hang up on you or, opt out of your texting, they definitely have limited attention to give to this. So what we have tended to do is, especially as you get into the last, 8 or 10 weeks before the election, is keep our message extremely simple. We basically start with, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm with Detroit Disability Power. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan group, and we're trying to make sure folks like you who care about our future get to the polls? Can I help you make a plan for voting? And that's kind of a pretty straightforward introduction. It lets the person know, you know, who you're coming at them from. If you're a volunteer, we definitely encourage people to add that word in there so that people know that this isn't, you know, sort of trying to make money. We definitely talk a lot about a plan for voting, because I think the best evidence has shown that people who have a plan are most likely to actually follow through and vote. Whereas people who sort of think, oh yeah, I want to vote. Well, the day comes, the weather may be bad, the babysitter may not have showed up, and you know, life gets in the way. But if you plan ahead and think through, what is your transport? Should you use absentee ballots? That's much more available, and early voting is much more available in most states than it ever has been in the past. So essentially the conversation that we want to launch with any of these folks is about a plan to vote. And we will hope to talk about disability, but quite frankly, what I think I have found, and many of our participants have found, is by naming that we're coming from a disability perspective early in the conversation, those who want to talk about that will know that they can, but those who aren't necessarily totally focused on that can still get voting information that we think is important.
That is super helpful. And we have a couple questions related to that. And I want to
Sure.
say first, in the phone banking that I've done for the last few elections, I think helping people make a plan is actually super fun.
Yeah.
You know, I remember talking to folks, and I think talking to some older folks who were trying to figure out transportation and didn't know exactly where to go. And, you know, sometimes it's like, well, I'm going to be at work. Can I vote near my work instead of near my home? And I remember just looking things up and giving people addresses, and, you know, then looking up where's the bus line, or they would tell me where the bus stop is. And, you know, I'd figure out what's close to that. And people were so grateful, you know, that it was just a very basic thing I was doing. And they were super excited to be able to go vote and to have that plan. So Shelby Butler had put in the chat, I'm interested in something to help with helping voters develop a voter plan. Is something like this in the guide? So it sounds like there's a big yes, but do you want to say more?
You know, I want to say, I don't think there's probably as much as there should be. You know, it's currently in its print form, 330 some pages. So, and that's partly because, of course, we used larger print, and, you know, we made it accessible for people who maybe, you know, can't or don't benefit from sort of your typical print version. But there's a lot in here. What I would say is, I think there's actually quite a lot out there on helping voters develop a voting plan. We do have some sample scripts in the guide, in our sample campaign resources at the end. And so it sort of shows how you can, you know, lead the conversation toward that. But the voting plan is going to depend so much on kind of where you're located and what the options are in your region. We just didn't go to that. But I do think that that's something that, you know, the major parties, the Democratic Party certainly has put out a lot of stuff along those lines. And I think that's available to find. But again, you know, I'm very mindful of the things that we didn't include. And of course, I wish we had done everything.
But the sample script that I'm looking at for Get Out the Vote does talk about the polling location, when will they vote, how will they get there, who will they go with. So those are some of the key things that are included. Thank you for that. I'm going to jump back to a question from Sheila Gunn Cushman. Sheila says, I hope there's discussion of how VBM, vote by mail, helps some, but is exclusionary to others. A truly accessible electronic voting system is critical, or else some can't vote at all. Print is exclusionary for some.
Yes, absolutely. We talk about how there need to be multiple modalities for voting. And again, we do have a section that sort of talks about what are your rights as a disabled voter, and what should organizations demand of election officials. So I would actually say that one of the really critical things that any organization can do, even if you're relatively low on person power and you can't, it's daunting to try to do a full, campaign with outreach to hundreds or thousands of people, I would say you could probably make the most difference of all by contacting the people running the elections in your municipality, in your state, in your region, and making sure that they have a plan for making voting accessible to every voter. Because a lot of poll workers don't know how the machines work. So yeah, the people who need the electronic machines may get there and there's no one to help them use it. There's a lot of other kinds of situations. Some really horrifying failures of accessibility for wheelchair users, pardon me. And so I would say, if you can do nothing else, as an organization, you could look at our chapter 15 and find what you need to. And when I say demand, I think it can be done in a supportive and friendly way. I don't think it has to be like, you jerks, you election officials, you're trying to, ruin and exclude us all. But I do think that you can put gentle pressure by offering some resources to election officials.
Right. And part of that voter plan can be what's most accessible to you, right? Let's figure out the
Exactly.
plan.
Yeah.
Okay, one more question on here, and then we'll open it up to hear from people what you're doing. I'm sorry, we always run out of time. We'll just have a few minutes for that. But another question for Tova, do you suggest approaching rural and metro differently?
I'm sure that there are differences in the way to approach a rural electorate. We worked with very dense populations. But again, we're right now planning our 2022 campaign, which is the first that we're using door to door. So the approach that we used in 2020 because of COVID really was one that would apply very, very well for rural, more dispersed populations. And that is, really focusing on mail, phone, text. I do think that the major challenge in mobilizing rural voters is probably the amount you'd have to invest in visiting each one, right? The distances between people are just, it becomes far more costly. So I do think, again, assuming you have a limited both calendar and budget, you probably do best through, some of these not in-person methods. I will mention one other thing, though, that I think could be really valuable with rural voters, and that is what's called relational organizing. And we do talk about that in one of our chapters. That is a relatively new approach people have used, where you seek to reach voters through folks that are already in their lives, their family members, their friends, their acquaintances even. So, if you know someone who does a lot of babysitting, you ask them to reach out to the families for whom they babysit. If you know someone, who gets their hair done every 2 weeks, you suggest to them that they strike up a conversation with the people in the salon. And so I do think that particularly rural communities, again, I'm not rural, so I don't want to presume, but my guess would be that there's a lot of importance to that kind of personal network, and that would be an important tool for that target audience.
Well, thank you so much, Tova, for working on this guide and sharing it with us. I hope everyone here will think about who they're going to email or talk to in person about this guide, post it on social media, etc. We have about 5 minutes for comments and questions from folks. Either put them in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll start with Marilyn Tucci.
Thank you. I wanted to share a couple of things. I work for an independent living center, and we help people, of course, with all disabilities. We have thousands of them. I'm in Suffolk County on Long Island. And one of the things before the pandemic hit was I used to carry the voter forms with me in my pocketbook, when I was on the buses, the trains, when I was on paratransit, I would talk to people, hand them out, do you vote? And of course, you know, there were minorities on the buses, you know, as well as people with disabilities. And I would convince them, you know, to sign up and vote. Sometimes they'd fill it out right on the bus and hand it to me, and then I'd send it through my agency. Other times they said, we will, you know, send it in. And I said, please do. Sometimes I even got their phone number if they were disabled, because I would bring people back to my agency. And I always believed it's very important for people to vote. I myself am blind. I wear a hearing aid in one ear. I have a guide dog. And I have voted since I was, I don't know if I was 19. Yeah, I think I was 19. And it was when President Nixon came in to be president, because it was important to me. My husband was in Vietnam, and he was going to take the troops out of Vietnam. And that was the first time I was able to vote. And I felt like we really need to get out of Vietnam. We have no business there. Even though our soldiers fought there, we had no business being there. It was a conflict. And so many people lost their lives. And I felt like, wow, if this president's going to take us out of there, he's got my vote. And my parents are diehard Democrats. They're no longer alive. But I vote for the best person. You know, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I'm an independent, and I'm proud to say that, because
Marilyn, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I just want to move on so we can hear from some other
Oh,
folks
okay,
too.
sorry.
Go ahead, Tova.
Well, I just wanted to quickly drop in that I love that you carry the forms around with you, Marilyn, and that's fantastic. People should make sure, though, some of the regressive state legislatures are passing rules about who can return a form for you. And there are these allegations of vote harvesting and that kind of thing. So you just want to be sure that you're in compliance with the local and the state law, which may be completely inappropriate, but just, you know, obviously we wouldn't want that to be wasted effort or used against any, you know, any important agency like Maryland's. But thanks, Marilyn. Love to hear from you.
Thank you. Let's hear from Lillian.
Hi, everyone. This is Lillian Alluri with the Rev Up voting campaign. I love this guide. I've been so excited for it to come out. And so I just wanted to plug an opportunity if you're thinking about trying to get started with doing voter outreach within the disability community. Rev Up at the American Association of People with Disabilities hosts a Disability Voting Rights Week, and we'd love for y'all to get involved. Thanks. I saw Jessica just put the link in the chat about Rev Up. I've just added this guide to our resources listed in our toolkits because I'm so excited to amplify this guide. So I'm just going to throw the link to Disability Voting Rights Week in the chat, and so that you can, you know, everything you need to know is there. There's a partner toolkit, there's social media toolkits coming, there's a training that we recorded. So I would love to see you all and connect with you all about that week. But yeah, thanks for doing this call to really talk about what all that's in this inclusive campaigns guide, because it's definitely a lot.
Lillian, when is Disability Voting Rights Week?
Great question. It is September 12 to 16.
Okay, that's wonderful. We often do a follow-up call on each organizers forum topic, and I felt like September, Tova and I talked about September feels too late for folks to really dig into their elections work. So maybe if folks use this guide, get involved with Rev Up, get additional resources there, we can do some kind of report back about how is it all going on the September call if folks are interested. All right, unfortunately, it is 10:59 and Tova says, I can't believe I didn't mention AAPD and Rev Up, and I feel the same way. So thank you to all of the folks doing disability voting rights work and get out the vote around the country through Rev Up. So huge thank you to Tova Perlmutter and everyone at Detroit Disability Power for putting this guide together and sharing it. Thanks to all of you for being here. Thank you, of course, to our ASL interpreters and our captioner, and to the National Disability Leadership Alliance for sponsoring the call. I will share the links out to the disability organizing listserv and on social media. And again, if you aren't connected and want to be, please put a note in the chat, or you can email me at jessica@sdaction.org with your information. And Tova, give us a parting word on why this work is so important, or anything you want to leave us with.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for the opportunity, first of all, to be here. Secondly, to give a parting word. I just want to say, and I'm betting that most of the people on this call know, that disabled voters have a lower turnout rate, and most of that is due to accessibility issues. But I think some of it is also due to feeling alienated. And so, you know, we can make the difference. If all disabled voters voted at the rates of non-disabled voters, we would change the outcomes of a lot of elections. So I want to say that. And I also want to say, don't let, you know, the fact that we said, well, September would be late for having this call suggest to you that it's too late to do anything. There are ways you can affect this election, whether you do a full court press campaign or, you know, simply mobilize your own constituency, your own members. You can make a difference, and every vote matters.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So we will plan on doing a follow-up either on Tuesday, September 13th or September 20th. If folks are interested in being part of that call, like helping put it together, sharing what you're doing, actually go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, it looks like a couple of people had to jump off already. Okay, so we'll follow up on that. And Terrence, great. And Terrence, if you can put your email in the chat. All right, so thank you to everyone. Take care and take action. We'll see you soon. Bye.